Juan Domingo Perón remains one of the most pivotal, complex and divisive figures in Latin American history. To some, he was a savior of the working class, a protector of the poor and a national hero who gave a voice to the voiceless. To others, he was a demagogue, an authoritarian who trampled on liberal democracy and institutional norms. His political ideology, Peronism, continues to exert extraordinary influence on Argentine politics decades after his death. Perón's life was a saga of power, passion, exile and return, punctuated by the transformative partnership with his iconic wife, Evita Perón, and a movement that redefined political identity in Argentina. Juan Domingo Perón was born on October 8, 1895 in Lobos, a small town in Buenos Aires province. His family background was modest. His father was a farmer of Italian and Spanish descent, and Perón's illegitimate birth was the subject of some controversy, something he later tried to obscure. Raised in a rural working-class environment, Perón developed a lifelong sensitivity to social inequalities and class differences. In 1911, at age 16, Perón entered the Colegio Militar de la Nación, or National Military College, where he trained to become a career army officer. The military in Argentina at the time was a stronghold of national pride, conservatism, and institutional discipline. Yet Perón was no ordinary soldier. He stood out for his intellectual curiosity and his ability to observe political structures and analyze power dynamics. During the 1920s and 30s, he held several administrative and teaching positions, including professorships at military institutions, where he taught military history and political theory. He authored a number of essays on leadership, strategy, and statecraft, laying the groundwork for the ideological blend of militarism, corporatism, and nationalism that would define Peronism. In the mid-1930s, Perón was posted to Europe as a military attaché, and his experiences abroad proved formative. He spent time in Mussolini's Italy, Franco's Spain, and Nazi Germany, where he studied not only military tactics but also the political use of mass mobilization, media, and centralized control. Perón was particularly struck by Mussolini's blend of social welfare and authoritarian governance, a system that courted the working class through grandiose gestures and paternalistic reforms while maintaining rigid control. However, Perón never became a doctrinaire fascist. Rather, he was a political pragmatist. He absorbed ideas selectively, adapting them to Argentina's context. He admired Mussolini's ability to rally the masses and use the state to mold society, but he rejected Nazi racial ideologies and totalitarianism. His takeaway was that a charismatic leader, armed with state machinery, media control, and worker support, could forge a new path beyond both capitalism and communism. In June 1943, amid increasing discontent with Argentina's civilian government and growing fears of Axis alignment during the Second World War, a military coup ousted President Ramón Castillo. Though initially a minor figure in the new military regime, Perón quickly maneuvered his way into power. He was appointed Secretary of Labor and Social Welfare, a relatively obscure post, but one he transformed into a political launching pad. Perón revolutionized the Secretariat. He turned it into an energetic ministry that directly intervened in labor relations. He instituted mandatory severance pay, retirement benefits, paid holidays, maternity leave, and workplace safety regulations. He supported unionization, arbitrated labor disputes in favor of workers, and increased the legal power of trade unions, thus binding organized labor to his personal political project. By framing labor reforms as moral imperatives rather than concessions, Perón cultivated a messianic image. His popularity surged, especially among urban workers, who began referring to him as El Líder. He appealed to the growing industrial proletariat of Buenos Aires and the surrounding areas, which had long been marginalized by Argentina's oligarchic political system. As Perón's star rose, he attracted enemies within the military and conservative establishment who feared his growing power and populist appeal. In October 1945, they forced him to resign and arrested him, but the backlash was explosive. On October 17, 1945, a massive crowd composed largely of factory workers, unionists and slum dwellers gathered in Plaza de Mayo to demand his release. This spontaneous uprising marked the birth of Peronism as a mass movement. It also demonstrated that Perón's base was not a passive constituency, it was a political force. Released from custody, Perón stood for president in the February 1946 elections. Backed by labor unions and a burgeoning network of loyal supporters, he ran on a platform of social justice, economic independence, and political sovereignty. He won decisively, inaugurating a new era in Argentine politics. Perón's first term was a whirlwind of reforms, nationalism, and consolidation of power. Economically, Perón sought to reduce Argentina's dependence on foreign capital and reshape its economy through import substitution industrialization. Under his administration, the state nationalized British-owned railroads, telecommunications, utilities, the central bank, and even private universities. He created state-run enterprises such as YPF in the oil sector, IAPI to control foreign trade, and SOMISA for the development of the steel industry. His overarching goal was to build an economically self-sufficient Argentina, protected from foreign exploitation. Argentina's agricultural wealth, particularly in beef and grain exports, had yielded large wartime surpluses, which Perón reinvested into public works, infrastructure, and social subsidies. This redistribution fueled public trust and enabled a temporary economic boom. Socially, Perón's reforms were among the most progressive in Latin America at the time. He established free public healthcare and secondary and university education. He expanded social security and retirement systems, invested in public housing programs, and mandated paid vacations and pensions. New laws protected workers from unfair dismissal and unsafe conditions. Under his leadership, real wages increased and union membership flourished. A critical figure during this period was Eva Perón. Though she held no formal office initially, she wielded immense influence through her philanthropy and activism. She founded the Eva Perón Foundation, which distributed food, clothing, and medicine to Argentina's most impoverished citizens. Her charisma and background resonated with the working class, and she was beloved as a champion of the poor and sick. She also played a leading role in the campaign for women's suffrage, which was achieved in 1947. Furthermore, she helped organize the female Peronist Party, mobilizing women in politics on an unprecedented scale. Perón was re-elected in 1951 with overwhelming support, but his second term was far more tumultuous. The economic boom began to fade, agricultural exports declined, inflation surged, and foreign reserves dwindled. To offset the downturn, Perón tightened his grip on power and shifted toward authoritarianism. He increased censorship of the press and opposition outlets, and political dissent was met with persecution or marginalization. He centralized control over education and the media, emphasizing nationalistic and pro-Peronist narratives. The regime began persecuting opponents, particularly within the Catholic Church, after Perón introduced controversial reforms such as legalizing divorce, removing religious instruction from schools, and asserting more state control over religious institutions. These acts ruptured his alliance with conservative Catholics and alienated many within his own coalition. The growing unrest reached a climax in June 1955 when elements of the Argentine Navy bombed Plaza de Mayo in an attempt to assassinate Perón. Though he survived, over 300 civilians were killed in what became one of Argentina's darkest days. By September 1955, a full-scale military uprising forced Perón into exile. He fled first to Paraguay, then settled in Francoist Spain under the protection of the Spanish regime. Though he was gone, Perón was far from forgotten. His name and image remained iconic, and Peronism became a kind of mythology in exile. He maintained correspondence with loyalists in Argentina, particularly with labor leaders, and continued to influence Peronist strategy from abroad. In exile, Peronism fractured into distinct ideological factions. Right-wing Peronists favored a more traditional nationalistic interpretation of his teachings and focused on restoring order. Meanwhile, Left-wing Peronists, particularly radical youth groups like the Montoneros, saw Peronism as a mandate for revolution and social equality. Each faction claimed to be the authentic heir to Perón's vision despite their differences. The military governments that followed attempted to suppress Peronism by banning its symbols and outlawing Peronist parties. These efforts largely failed, and the mystique of Perón only grew. By the early 1970s, Argentina had descended into political violence, economic crisis, and civil unrest. Many came to believe that only Perón could restore stability, prompting efforts to negotiate his return. In June 1973, Juan Perón returned to Argentina to a rapturous welcome. But the return was marred by internal conflict. At Ezeiza airport, as thousands gathered to greet him, violent clashes between left and right-wing Peronists broke out, resulting in a massacre that sadly claimed numerous lives. The unity of the Peronist movement had shattered. Perón was re-elected president in October 1973, with his third wife, Isabel Perón, as vice president. However, the 78-year-old leader faced a deeply divided movement, a crumbling economy and escalating political violence. His health deteriorated rapidly and he struggled to govern effectively. During this short third term, paramilitary death squads such as the Argentine Anti-Communist Alliance, or AAA, began targeting left-wing activists and intellectuals. These state-sanctioned killings deepened Argentina's descent into chaos. On July 1, 1974, Juan Perón died of heart failure. His wife Isabel became president, but she lacked political experience and failed to stabilize the country. Her weak leadership led to a military coup in 1976 and the beginning of a brutal dictatorship that would haunt Argentina for years. Juan Perón's legacy is both enduring and divisive. His influence is measured not only by the policies he enacted, but also by the powerful mythos he created. He established a cult of personality. His image, alongside Evita's, became symbolic of national pride and worker dignity. Even today, their portraits hang in government offices and union halls across the country. Peronism defies ideological categorization. It is not strictly left-wing or right-wing, but an adaptable political identity. It has supported both capitalism and socialism, authoritarianism and democracy, depending on the moment and the messenger. Its emotional and symbolic power has enabled it to survive for generations. Leaders as ideologically diverse as Carlos Menem and Cristina Fernández de Kirchner have claimed Perón's mantle, shaping his ideas to fit their own agendas. The political model he developed, charismatic populism anchored in mass mobilization, social welfare and economic nationalism, has influenced countless leaders in Latin America. He transformed the relationship between the Argentine state and its citizens, built powerful alliances with labor, and left behind an unfinished experiment in social justice. Juan Perón was more than a president. He was a phenomenon. His rule reshaped Argentina's institutions, society, and political culture. Through reform and repression, charisma and control, he rewrote the country's political DNA. His life story mirrors the trajectory of 20th century Latin America, the rise of mass politics, the clash of ideologies, and the enduring appeal of populist leadership. Perón's Argentina blurred the lines between democracy and dictatorship, between leader and movement. To this day, Argentines live in the long shadow of Peronism, an ideology that continues to evolve, inspire, and divide. Whether revered or reviled, Juan Domingo Perón remains the central figure in Argentina's modern political identity, an eternal presence in the nation's collective imagination. Thanks for watching. For more bite-sized bits of blistering history, please like and subscribe.